Welcome back from the lunch break. We hope you're able to enjoy a refreshing lunch. Our first presentation in this session is on the CARES Act OTC drug volume reporting. Our presenter, Kim Armstrong, is an associate director within Perrigo OTC Regulatory Affairs Operations. Our final presentation before the afternoon break will describe the roadmap in meeting CARES Act OTC drug amount from Johnson & Johnson's Consumer Incorporated's perspective. Our presenter, Gracy Tirado, is an Associate Director of Regulatory Affairs Compliance for Johnson & Johnson Consumer Incorporated. Please join me in welcoming our first presenter, Kim Armstrong.
Welcome, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share the Perrigo experiences of the CARES Act volume reporting from a large volume OTC perspective. The objective of my presentation is to give you a little bit of information about Perrigo, a lot of information about the Perrigo CARES Act project, initiation through submission. We'll go through some suggestions and, of course, an overall summary. Perrigo is a self-care company that makes lives better by bringing quality, affordable self-care products that consumers trust everywhere they are sold. Perrigo is one of the world's largest OTC companies, with multiple manufacturing facilities, manufacturing billions of doses per year, thousands of formulas and SKUs. The product classification that we're going to focus on today is the OTC drug products. Perrigo, as a drug product manufacturer, maintains over 4,000 drug listings, 27 site registrations, over 1,000 label specs. We submit on average 3,000 new and/or revisions to existing drug listings for 70 store brand customers, while all supporting 125 ANDAs. Okay, enough about Perrigo in general. Let's get into Perrigo CARES Act project. So I'll share that our initial interpretation of the guidance definitely caused some panic, based on, for one, the uniqueness of the data, and two, the fast approaching due date. While we had a limited understanding of the guidance, we knew enough to kick off a project. So on November 8th, roughly a week after issuing the guidance, our first meeting was held. We include our friends from information technology, quality assurance, procurement, and contract sales. We reviewed the report requirements because we needed to understand who held the keys for the information and who could help us generate a report. So at the end of the meeting, a core team was established. I'm going to call them the A team. There were 4 dedicated resources, 2 from IT and 2 from regulatory affairs. We also had a support team that included QA, procurement, and sales. They weren't doing all the dirty work, but they were there to help guide us and answer any questions we may have. Next, we described the basic reporting criteria. I'm going to say very loosely described, as it was based on our interpretation at the time. At this point in time, I'm going to say that we had as many questions as we did answers. It goes without saying, our understanding of the requirements was an evolving process that changed based on our interactions with the FDA, the SPO working group, and our customers. We definitely learned a ton during this process. The project data dive. So the basic requirements, we've identified those. The project team is established. It's now time to dive into the data. This data was unlike any typical business management data that we've seen so far. So let me clarify atypical. We're definitely used to reporting products distributed by dose, but reporting volume with active NDC for product that's been QA released by month, by pack size, inner and outer container, that's very different. And different in the scope of this project was equivalent to a significant amount of time. So we did spend a significant amount of time discussing the requirements with IT, quality, and of course regulatory affairs. Our key task was to understand how we can relate and extract the Perrigo data to meet the requirements of the regulations. In order to do that, we actually had to ask ourselves these questions. What system or systems contain the data? We actually at the end identified two. And can you take a guess at the first source? If you guessed SAP, you're right. SAP controls most of the information within the company. So of course it contained 99% of the data. That missing 1% was the actual active NDCs. So while SAP is smart, it's not able to differentiate an NDC status of active, deactivated, or reserved. So source number 2, can you guess what it is? If you guessed Excel, you're probably laughing or rolling your eyes. But yes, we still use Excel spreadsheets, actually quite a bit. RA manages our customer label or NDCs in spreadsheets that include label code, product code, size code, and NDC status. So the next question we had to ask ourselves is who can extract the data? When you use words like atypical, unique, and different, I don't know about you, but my guess is there's probably not a report that already contains this criteria. So we needed a new report. I can speak for myself. I definitely am not capable of writing an SAP report. So I went back to the core team, and the lucky prize winner, just don't ask them, was actually IT. IT was actually able to build and execute the reports with perfection. Our IT analysts were our rock stars and really our project heroes. The last question, how? How or can a report be created in the format with the data required? Again, to our rescue, IT. IT performs the magic behind the scenes. If you were to ask me how to describe what they do, how they do it, it would be an epic fail. I am clueless, but thank goodness for IT. I do know that we spent long days, nights, and weekends, but the end result was a report in the format of the required data. So thank you. Challenges and successes. We've identified the sources and structure. We're now moving toward the report. We'll touch on our experience, both challenges and successes, with interpretation, translation, timing, and submission of the reports. Interpretation and translation are pretty much words, right? More specifically, these words were the ones that caused us the most challenge in a complex structure. For example, we have material that often moves as it's released within our multiple Perrigo sites. So material is manufactured in what we're going to call Facility 1, packaged in Facility 2, and then it's moved to Facility 3, which is actually a warehouse where the release occurs. So what site is actually considered the manufacturer for QA release? So remember, the report requires a release associated with the manufacturer's DUNS. We found that QA actually held the key to help us identify by an SAP QA release status the requirements to meet the report. In another instance, we have contract manufactured product, the same product, that can be received in 3 different packaging configurations. First, we receive bulk tablets for further processing. On another occasion, we can receive bulk tablets that have been stripped for further processing. And then we can also receive fully packaged finished product. We had to ask ourselves, how can we differentiate these different types within SAP for our portion of the reporting responsibilities? Well, this time we went to procurement and our sales team as they held the key. They were able to help us define the criteria in SAP to pull from the report. Last but not least, I'm just going to go over a hurdle, not really a challenge. We had questions coming in from our contract manufacturers and packagers, as well as customers. We were all looking for confirmation or clarification of the reporting requirements. We did our absolute best to answer all of their questions. Within our answer, though, we put a huge disclaimer. We are not experts. We, as well as everyone else, continue to grow our understanding of the regulations. We will share our interpretation, but that's about as best that we could do at that time. Okay, let's dive into our 2020 report. I'm sure that everyone has done the math, but in case you haven't, there were actually a total of 110 days from the time the guidance issued to the due date for the report. This is calendar days, not working days, and didn't include holidays, two big ones during that time. So let's go ahead and review the overall project report timing and the submission of the 2020 report. So our report development took up our hugest time with a total of 90 days. This then allowed us 20 days to execute and submit the reports. Of those 20 days, 11 days were used for execution. That was typically taking us 3 days to execute the report and modify, which of course we had to run a few times to get right. And then that allowed us 7 days for the FDA portal submission. I will tell you, for 3 of those 7 days, we were receiving nothing but failures for upload. It took us about 4 times, and at the end, our first report that was successful contained 2,500 rows, and it was copied into an FDA template. But we started off with a file containing 9,500 rows of data on an internally created Excel spreadsheet that mimicked the FDA template. Boy, did we learn a lot. So days 104 through 107, we reformatted all the reports and successfully uploaded them. In summary, the 2020 report contained 22 reports, 4,321 NDCs, with a total of 56,174 rows of data. Worth noting, the validation errors the first attempts were not easily identifiable, and we actually missed a few, and I would say probably our first 4 reports. So the 2020 report is done. The clock's still ticking. We still have the 2021 report to submit. The due date is actually 200 days after the guidance issued, or 83 days after the 2020 report. We do acknowledge that on March 21st, FDA issued a statement clarifying that the report dates were non-binding, but the report was still required. That word, non-binding, brought a huge sense of relief to our group. We weren't under the gun to meet the due date. So let's go into the timing for the 2021 report. So we continue to focus and aim for the original due date of May 16th. Why not? We've already been through this. It's fresh in our mind. Let's keep going. So day 117 through 195, we reviewed and updated the report based on the experiences that we encountered in 2020. We also took this opportunity to consult with the FDA to confirm our interpretation of manufactured under contract, as well as contract manufacturer packager, to make sure our interpretations were in alignment with the regulation and expectations of the FDA. A huge thank you to the CARES Act team who communicated via email and for 2 online meetings to help us resolve and confirm our interpretations. So day 195 through 210, all of our submissions were complete. We were slightly outside of the target due date of 200, but that's okay. We were successful and the reports looked good. So overall, our 2021 submissions can be described as, I'm going to use the word uneventful. We had no submission issues The Excel row limitations were fixed. Errors were easily identified. So kudos to the FDA team for that March fix. It was a huge relief. In totality, the 2021 report submission included 5 reports, 6,246 NDCs, with a total of 81,198 rows of data. Let's do a side-by-side comparison of our data. You'll see the most significant change is the number of reports. We go from 22 to 5. And I would say the biggest contributor to this is that March fix. I don't know what they did, but thank you for doing that. One thing that is kind of invisible on this report, but noteworthy, is the reduction in the amount of time that it took from our portal upload to receival of the acknowledgements. Those all now occurred within just a few minutes of the submissions. So as you can see, our reports contain a large volume of data pulled from a very complex manufacturing environment. We were successful at fulfilling the requirement, and I'm very proud to say the collective core team is responsible for that success. Okay, let's now go through suggestions. I've described the short-term challenges that were overcome. I want to take the opportunity to offer a few suggestions and/or questions and comments based on things that occurred during the project. So suggestion 1, the drug listing volume report uses a limited list of business operations when compared to that of the drug listing and facility establishment registrations. Are there future plans to align the definition of operations among the various requirements? Suggestion 2, the reporting scheme is unique to the drug listing volume report. It's unclear at this time how the data will be used to assess drug shortages within the context of the data released by month and year at the pack size. Are there considerations being given to limit the focus to yearly volumes for medically necessary drug products? And then suggestion 3. The year end is pretty heavy with filing requirements, with fulfilling year-end volumes and criteria. The new year is then busy catching up and setting goals. Has there been any consideration to extend the February due date to later in the year? We're finally to summary. I've shared challenges that we've overcome and rewards that we've achieved. Let's pause. Ask yourself these questions. Was it difficult? Did it test our systems? Did it stretch our understanding of our internal systems and FDA requirements? If you answered yes to any one of these questions, you are not alone. We embraced and were successful at meeting the requirements. Are our reports without error? I would say likely not. Are the errors minimal? I would say likely yes. This project stretched our ability to react to new and changing requirements. Was it without obstacles? Absolutely not. I will say that we came together, industry, FDA, as well as our internal teams to help meet the requirements. I've been in this industry for over 30 years, and I'm here to tell you I'm living proof that you never stop learning. I honestly believe that I do learn something new every day, usually not just one thing. You never know what you're capable of, so embrace challenges and continue to grow. And with that, I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share our drug listing volume report experiences. And next, I want to welcome our J&J representative who will share her experiences.
My name is Gracy Tirado. I'm part of the regulatory compliance team at Johnson & Johnson Consumer Inc. I'm so glad to be here sharing our adventure during the CARES drug amount reporting for OTC products. You may hear a similar discussion from all the presenters that you can relate to your company or experience following this process. We were asked to share how did the process work, where the OTC industry have problems, Where was the confusion? And any suggestions? I tried to capture all those topics during this presentation. At Johnson & Johnson, we are committed to provide safe, innovative, and life-enhancing products that meet or exceed customers and regulatory requirements through a culture of customer focus, continuous improvement, collaboration, and excellence in all that we do. The values that guide our decision-making are spelled out in our credo. Put it simply, our credo challenges us to put the needs and well-being of the people we serve first. Here a summary of the topics we will discuss. The roadmap adventure during this process, workload, data source, and resources utilized, interpretation of the responsibilities, learning through the process, and recommendations. To answer how did the process work, let's start with the roadmap adventure. It started in October 2021 when FDA posted the guidance and we all received the email. It took us around 3 weeks to gather information, share drug amount reporting requirements with cross-company and sectors, 2 weeks to develop a process to obtain the data, and 3 months to do the analysis and reporting while executing and refining the process. It was challenging due to the timing and interpretation of the requirements, the how and the what. How we will do this, how the FDA will use this information, and what we're doing. Let's start explaining our workload. If you are mentally comparing with your company, this may seem high or low according to your company responsibilities. To provide you with an idea, let's go over the 2021 reporting. The reported information include 9 labeler codes, 930 NDCs. Of those, 39% were reported as zero, meaning no product was released for those ones in 2021. 16,029 lines reported. For the reports, we follow the CSV template. Understanding that FDA updated the problem with their report generation, 9 reports were submitted in 2021 compared to 21 in 2020. We use at least 6 data sources. FDA National Drug Code Directory to capture NDCs that were active without data release, reported as zero. SIP report, it captures material code, product information, and the amount of release per month per establishment. NDC list, product specifications, drug establishment current registration, and CDR Direct to ensure manufacturing sites were properly identified per NDC according to the drug listings. Let's talk about the resources or time required for the analysis and final reporting. For the SIP report, supply planning evaluated the need and took the initiative to develop an SIP report to capture product releases. The report includes material code, product information, and the amount released per month per establishment. Development of the report took around 2 weeks. In addition to the development, going back and forth with questions and clarifications took around 6 to 8 hours. Every time the report is needed, it will take approximately 2 to 4 hours to run the report and properly filter it for the CARES drug amount reporting requirements. How about the analysis and final reporting? The SIP report was compared against the 6 data sources already mentioned on the prior slide. In addition, multiple discussions with external manufacturers, and we have around 60 establishments and internal sites were performed, resulted in 2.5 dedicated resources for 3 months. Responsibility interpretation. The slide includes Section 3A, content of reports from the guidance. According to the guidance, each registrant that lists a drug must report it annually to the FDA. Johnson & Johnson Consumer performs the drug listing of their products as a label or code owner and therefore reported the amount of released product independent of who was the manufacturing establishment, external or internal. This slide also includes Section 3A, content of reports from the guidance. The guidance only requires the most relevant business operation to be reported. For product released at the pack establishment, Johnson & Johnson Consumer performs trace back to the manufacturing site, considering it the most relevant establishment. As we know, the report does not include pack as business operation. Learnings. One of the difficulties we encountered was identifying the active NDCs in 2020. I have no idea if anyone else had that problem, but we did. As we know, the number of NDC listed in a year varies from the previous year depending on the listing, new listings, and determine the exact number of NDC listed in 2020 was complex. For now on, to minimize this difficulty, every year around December 31st, we will be saving the reports from the National Drug Code Directory NDC database. Then we can compare it with the prior year to facilitate the identification. Lessons learned. Other learnings while compiling and evaluating the data. Quantity release data comes from supply planning, and listing data comes from compliance. Supply planning understands product codes, and compliance understands NDCs. Therefore, compiling the data for Drug Amount Reporting Act required to match both SIP data and NDCs with a common connecting link, product code. In addition, OTC product released at pack establishments must be traced up to the manufacturer establishment. An additional difficulty is encountered for those products manufactured at multiple sites. Pretty sure every one of you responsible for this report found this very difficult and complex. In addition, multiple discussions with some EMs related to the business operations required to be reported were performed to ensure repack was properly understood as per definition, not by the common business use of the word. And last but not least, SIP release information required for the innermost, outermost quantity released needs to align with the packaging configuration per NDC. In our process, data conversion was made case by case. Reporting kits gift set caused some confusion. Let me explain. A drug listed kit gift set could contain multiple products, non-OTCs, with OTC product packed together to build the kit gift set. As an example, we can have a gift set NDCY that includes an OTC product NDCX. The individual OTC product and the kit gift set are both marketed in US. During the annual reporting amount released, the individual OTC released at manufacturing establishment was reported. Kit released at the pack establishment was traced back to the manufacturing establishment of the OTC in order to be reported. Since no mechanism to ensure that the packed gift set and the individual OTC product are linked may result in a double counting. Let's talk about some recommendations. First, reporting zero. Since every manufacturer establishment per drug listing needs to be reported, even though no manufacturing was performed. For example, JJCI reported 39% as zero for the 2021 report. However, zero could be related to a backup site validated to support the product demand, not as a regular manufacturing site. Recommendation: if the product contains multiple manufacturing, however, only one site manufactured and the product was released, we should only report that establishment. The other manufacturing sites should not be reported as zero. Zero should be required if there is no release at all for that product. Recommendation number 2. The slide includes Section 3A, Content of Reports, from the guidance, organized by the amount of drug released in each month. Since the CARES drug amount reporting will enhance FDA ability to identify, prevent, and mitigate possible drug shortage, and report is provided yearly, we recommend to provide the release amount for the year, not per month. Include this as part of the annual product review process or part of the blanket not change certification of product listing. Recommendation number 3. The slide includes Section 3A, Content of Reports, from the guidance. Talks about business operation that is most relevant. To avoid multiple interpretations, clarification should be added to the guidance on the most relevant business operation. Recommendation number 4. The slide shows Section 3B, Timing Report, from the guidance. Report to be submitted not later than February 15 of the following year. To obtain accurate data and avoid duplication, we will have to wait until December 31st to generate the SIP report. The reporting day as February 15 only allows us 45 days, 1.5 months, to collect, evaluate, and generate the report. According to the prior experiences, that will not be sufficient. Report days should be moved from February 15 to at least April 15 annually. Final recommendation, but not least, OTCs generally have a different benefit risk profile and are intended for symptomatic relief for minor conditions that can be self-diagnosed. The administrative burden incurred by reporting volumes of all OTCs substantially overweights the public health benefit of potentially mitigate shortages. This is especially true considering most OTCs are produced by multiple manufacturers with diverse supply chains. We encourage the FDA to only require annual reporting of volume of OTCs that appears on the FDA Essential Medicine List, which have been determined to be medical necessary in times of public health emergencies. Let's do a quick summary. We share roadmap adventure with timelines, workflow, data sources and resources, and data analysis and reporting took us 2.5 dedicated resources for 3 months. Responsibilities. JJCI performs the drug list of their OTC products as labeler code owner, and for this guidance, also reported the amount released for all their applicable products. Learnings including packed gift sets and individual OTC products. Linked may be required to avoid double counting. And here a summary of the discussed recommendations. First, zero reporting. Only report zero if there is no release at all for that product. Provide the release information for the year, not per month, and include this as part of the APR process or part of the blanket not change certification. Clarification on the most relevant business operation will be required or suggested. Change the report date to April 15 instead of February 15. Last but not least, only require annual reporting of volume of OTCs that appears on the FDA Essential Medicine list. Thank you for allowing Johnson & Johnson Consumer Inc. representative, me, to share our adventure during the CARES drug amount reporting for OTC products. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Welcome back from the break. We're on the home stretch now. Our next presentation is on the reporting drug amounts under Section 510 of the FD&C Act as an authorized agent and a CMP consultant. Our presenter, Casey Stevenson, is the VP of Regulatory at Sudical Laboratories Incorporated. Our final presentation in this session is a summary of the experience of putting together and submitting drug volume reporting data. Our presenter, Ben Harpster, is a Quality Assurance Compliance Manager for GlaxoSmithKline and has served with GfK for 18 years. Please join me in welcoming Casey Stevenson.
Thank you everyone for joining us today for this presentation on reporting drug amounts under Section 510 of the FD&C Act. My name is Ken Stevenson. I am the Vice President of Regulatory at Sudical Labs. I'm one of the SPL process team chairpeople. I'm a longtime active member of AFTO and NEHA, if you're familiar with those organizations. A quick disclaimer that the views reflected in this presentation are solely that of the author and don't reflect the views of the FDA. They're based on my experience of going through this process. So I'm a member of a team called Sudical Labs. We're a Texas company, as you can see down there on the bottom. We like our boots and our flag, our country. Sudical Labs is an organization of subject matter experts in all sorts of areas: product formulation, validation, sterilization, electronic submissions is minor. We also have an FDA registered analytical lab, including micro and chemistry. And then all of this is put together to back up our cGMP quality consultancy. And of course, in Dallas, we have a stable of esteemed consultants that I have a picture of there for you on this side. Idea as to how the process went for me as I'm trying to get the best idea of what's the big picture. The resources for me included the draft guidance, the technical conformance guide, the process instructions for CEDAR NextGen portal. There were a lot of appendices and footnotes in the guidances. And obviously, there's a ton of info. And then I had to take into consideration so that I could put it to work for my team and what we were doing with our clients. I had to put in consideration all this with respect to the client scenarios. And I also got to use the resources of the SPL process team, namely just the individuals on the process team have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and some of them were able to host question and answer sessions as well as provide some presentation material, and that really helped illuminate a lot of the question areas that I had particularly. Further about the process of decoding the guidance for me. So the draft guidance itself about reporting amount of listed drugs under the FD&C Act was issued in October of 2021. And again, I said that's a draft guidance. And it gives the general who, what, when, where, and why of drug volume reporting. There were a lot of important footnotes. In this particular guidance, the footnotes included definitions of released, meaning since we are reporting the drug volume amount being distributed per unit, they were giving us a very defined definition for what they were considering distributed, meaning released as given by ICH Q7, the guidance for active pharmaceutical ingredients from September 2016. Won't bore you with the details, but it has basically to do with signed off by the QC unit. There were other important definitions: API, registrant, manufacturer, commercial distribution, applicant, unfinished drugs. Of course, all of these are typically referenced to other related statutory requirements. And then in this guidance, there was also the note that CMO should definitely consider using quality agreements to work out some of the finer details. And you'll see why as we go forward. There's also a helpful Q&A section. So the next part of the resources involved in all of this, as I was going through the process, was decoding the guidance for the actual technical aspect of this, which is called the Technical Conformance Guide, and it's an actual final guidance, which was interesting to me, as the previous guidance was still in draft format. This specifies a little bit more about the report content, as well as kind of how to do the report and how it's going to be submitted. There were some important footnotes, including the definitions of relabeling, repackaging, again, the same definition for released. And then again, there were helpful appendix. There was a helpful appendix, and it had tables this time. So, and then I came into the picture, or my firm came into the picture as given in this particular final guidance, which specifies the submitter type. And for my uses, I was the submitter type as an authorized agent, which is defined here in section 4 of this particular guidance. So as the authorized agent and part of a cGMP consultancy, I had to identify our responsibilities and what our roles were going to be. And for purposes of my experience, they typically came into 2 different roles. And one of those roles was I would provide guidance as an outside consultant, basically Q&A, in various layers or various levels of the teams that I was working with to help them in the data compilation or submission process. The typical questions made two main categories. And the 2 categories were obviously product-related questions. Mostly, is this eligible for reporting? Is this what I have to report on? And then reporting responsibility related questions of, are we responsible for reporting on this? So that was one of my roles. Or I would also help in the role of submitting as the actual authorized agent, which if I took that role on, that would involve establishing a submission agreement, establishing a CEDAR NextGen portal if I didn't already have one, providing a CSV template to the client based upon what information they had given to me, And then all of that I would compile into the particular format necessary for submission across the Cedar NextGen portal, which anybody who's submitted is familiar with that particular format. So a general description of a few client manufacturing scenarios. Client A is a manufacturer and owns their own brand. So client B is a brand owner that uses CMO for the manufacturing operations. Client C is a CMO and works for a number of brand owners. Client D is a brand owner that works with a number of CMOs. Client E is a CMO that also owns the brand but contracts out manufacturing processes to another CMO. Client F is a brand owner and a CMO with multiple facilities where manufacturing operations take place, except for those operations that are contracted out to another CMO with multiple facilities. Client G is a brand owner and a manufacturer who will use a CMO to fulfill production quota when behind on production numbers. And client H is a CMO who will manufacture for a larger brand when the larger brand has overflow production. So with all of these complicated manufacturing scenarios, notice a lot of them have to do with CMOs. I work a lot with CMOs. So one must ask, how do I even get started? Well, I had a couple of steps that we primarily took whenever we came in to try to help on all of this. In each case, the first step we requested, and typically, again, we were working to help teams of people compile this information. So we weren't actually working to compile this information. We were working to lead the team that was compiling this information. So a lot of stuff was hard not to get lost in translation. In each case, the first step was to request an individual assessment per product SKU. And I'm not certain that happened, but we did our best. So for the reporting period, because we got to keep this focused on the reporting period, we don't want scope creep. The drug volume reporting data elements that we were looking for were the DUNS, the NDCs, the 6 eligible business operations that were limited by the six per the guidance. The guidance limited them to 6, and how many units were released. Again, released. And again, our scenarios, I want to narrow the scope a little bit. Our scenarios are limited to domestic OTC products. And that was a fairly simple reporting process unless we had CMOs involved. Smiley face. In each case, the second step was to request a reconciliation of the registration and listing information. Again, I'm not sure that happened, but we did our best. And why was that important? Well, because the drug volume data is based upon registration and listing. So we want to make sure the registration and listing data was accurate. Typically, we would ask the question, was there an NDC in place during the reporting period? For each NDC under the registrant and per DUNS number, we would reconcile all that information. Then we would request that we update the registration and listing information so that we can include that information on the next drug volume report. A lot of times this is more complicated than it really appears at first, and I'm here to tell you that quality agreements can certainly help. A little bit about the general experience of reporting drug volumes in the Cedar NextGen portal. The FDA Cedar NextGen portal tech staff were on the ball. Everybody that I've heard from, including comments from the SPL process team, as well as client scenarios, FDA was, the Cedar NextGen portal was on, tech staff were on the ball. So for my uses, and under advisement of several colleagues, I chose to primarily use the CSV function, meaning I would take an Excel CSV file and upload that rather than use the manual entry. That was an option in the Cedar NextGen portal because manual entry is oftentimes inherently hard to get to function correctly, especially if it's web-based, and that was some of the reports that we heard, particularly the timing out, having to start over at an earlier step. obviously parse errors, typical validation errors, and then there was trouble getting lead 0 on a 9-digit DUNS in the CSV file. We couldn't get it to accept a 0 as a leading 0, excuse me. So challenges. The challenges for me were working through several layers of consultants and executives. Okay, so a lot of times I was working, I hate to say it, but kind of like the last ditch effort to get all of this worked out in a short amount of time. And by that time, there was already another consultant that had tried and was knowledgeable, but just didn't have the answers at the time. So providing guidance to the teams was actually really difficult. It was always, do we report on this? Are we responsible for this? It's difficult to implement. The guidance is based simply upon it. It's not anything. I mean, it's not anything that the FDA did or anything like that. It's just that we're getting increasingly complicated supply chains, and that's an inherent confounding variable to all of this. Makes it increasingly more and more complicated. And then, of course, the short time frame to get electronic resource planning systems in place in order to generate this report, and then even possibly to validate that report, that takes a lot of time. And like I said a number of times now, quality agreements were not in place or sufficient for managing registration and listing data or volume data. So a lot of times that was because the NDC number itself serves no internal function at the business. And I want to point out, though, that is changing from the top down. It's getting more and more to where the NDC number itself has a direct tie to the business processes, and that's, in my estimation, a good thing. So recommendations, again, hat in hand here. Everybody did a good job, and I want to make sure everybody knows that, but here I've been asked to give recommendations for improvement, so that's what I'd like to be able to do here. So for industry, we need to actively manage our registration and listing data. It's not a one and done thing. We need to reconcile our NDC listings at regular intervals. And if possible, we need to basically map the appropriate internal material code to the appropriate NDC code and then validate that. And however that gets done at your place of business, whether that's electronic resource planning or spreadsheet or crayons, just that's what we're trying to do here. And it's very important to have quality agreements in place for all of this. I've not seen a whole lot of quality agreements in my experience that are robust enough to manage a lot of the registration and listing, let alone the drug volume reporting. And I'm sure that that will change with time going forward. And that would be the take home, primarily for industry, the quality agreements. So for FDA, recommendations, help industry with quality agreements. Thank you for the 2016 November industry guidance. The time frame for reporting was awfully quick. We could certainly help with some clearing up from the guidances, right? But we still need to work on the guidances. And then we would recommend in the future we should move towards auto-populated report similar to the Cedar Direct portal. The blanket no changes template is auto-populated if you enter the registry information. I could see this process working a lot better if we were able to do something like that. And then just simply provide the volume data for those NDCs. And then, of course, we all know that the data can be used to focus existing regulatory programs. As noted in one of the footnotes, helping to sort out packaging discrepancies. So just want to thank everyone for joining us today. One last time, the SPL process team, the FDA, of course, the Cedar Next Gen Tech team, FDA Cedar Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, and SBIA.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I will also be providing industry perspective on drug volume reporting, both for GSK as well as a smaller pharmaceutical company who shared their information with me. So some background about GSK. GSK is a distributor and manufacturer of both prescription drugs and vaccines. We have about 20 manufacturing sites that are involved in supply to the U.S. market. Some sites are just testing labs. Others are manufacturers and/or packaging. GSK manufactures some of its own products as well as products for other companies. These can include pharma products, vaccines, and OTCs. So whenever I have to review a new guidance, one thing I try and remember is don't panic. I know it can seem very overwhelming when a new guidance comes out. I definitely recommend reviewing it several times before you come up with a plan. And with that, I'll segue into what GSK's plan was. So our plan, high level. Step 1, identify the scope and responsibility. Step 2, identify the source or sources of information. Step 3, collect and collate the data. Step 4, review and submit the reports. So for step 1, identifying the scope and responsibility, based on the guidance, reporting was to be done on all NDCs. This included distributed NDCs, drug product manufacturer NDCs, and drug substance manufacturer NDCs. And at GSK, we had all three types. So based on our understanding of the guidance, GSK would be reporting for products manufactured at GSK manufacturing sites. This would be both ours and other companies, but it would only be for the sites that we own. Contract manufacturers that manufacture our products would do their own reporting. And we would use release from site of manufacturer as that release identifier. We chose to use release from site because you don't have release to market. If you were talking about bulks, you would only have that for the distributed product. So to be standard across the board, we use release from site. And I know there's been discussions about that amongst companies. So next step was to identify the source or sources of information. So as reporting was to be done per the NDC, this meant that the structured product labeling, or SPL, would be the starting source of SKUs and scope. These would be provided by the SPL subject matter expert, which at GSK happens to be me. Once we had that list, the next step was to link those NDCs to the material codes that identify the individual products in our resource management software. In our case, this software is SAP, which I believe a number of companies use. So for the linking of the NDCs, there was two processes that had to happen for us. One was linking the NDCs from the material codes for the marketed SKUs. Now this was a manual process, but it wasn't particularly difficult as we were already tracking this information. It was just happened to be in a separate system. And I will say with serialization about to become required, that information is actually being entered into SAP. So going forward, it may be something we can extract directly without having to have calculations or data systems to analyze. But again, that was the easier part. The harder part was linking the NDCs to material codes for the manufacturer NDCs. There really the stuff was siloed and rarely crossed over. So we had to do a manual process to make sure we got them all identified properly. This took cooperation between myself and the site planning departments. So once all the material codes were identified, data was extracted from SAP for the reporting period. And then with some help from our electronic data analytics groups, we were able to put calculations in a spreadsheet to generate the data in the requested format. So it wasn't manually entering the information. The information was extracted from SAP, put into a table, which then calculated it, and then spit it out as the required format. So I mentioned calculations. Well, here's some examples of the calculations that we're talking about. So for bulks, both drug substance and drug product, you would have to do some calculations, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then products that had multiple levels of packaging. An example of this would be a carton containing 10 vials. While you may have the ability to pull from SAP the amount of saleable units, or the cartons, you then had to manually or automatedly generate that 10 times that number. So for bulk drug substance and drug product, calculations were a bit more difficult because the systems don't align. So in SAP, the amount is tracked based on the yield. So for an API, that would be kilograms. And for a drug product, as an example, number of tablets. However, in the SPL, it is tracked by container. So how do we match those two up? So we made the decision to add up the total yield of batches per month, divide by the amount identified in the SPL, and round up. We felt that this gave the most accurate display of our capability for manufacture, which was our understanding of the purpose of this. But I will ask for clarification from the FDA on, is this the way you'd like it, or is there another way you'd like us to handle this? So a simplified example of what I'm talking about. We'll use API for this. 2 batches were manufactured in June, both with a yield of 100 kilograms. And then in the drug listing, the container, a drum in this case, is identified as holding 10 kilograms. 200 kilograms would be 2 times 100 for the batches, total yield, divided by 10 gives us 20 drums for June. Fairly simple, but that's where you don't have any remainder. The numbers are all whole. That's rarely the case in manufacturing. Lastly, for our process, we had to review and then submit the report. So the collated data was reviewed by the SPL SME, myself, as well as each manufacturing site that we were reporting for, the logistics department would review it. We were looking for different things. For myself, I was looking for the correct NDCs. Were the multipliers and divisors set up correct? Did we have the right business operation identified? Were the packaging descriptions correct? Site logistics was looking more at the numbers that were being reported. Did they make sense? Were they too much, too little? Did we maybe miss something? But by the time we were both done, we had results that we felt confident to submit to the FDA. So on to the last step, which is to submit the actual data. Now the FDA gave us 2 ways to submit the data using the CDER NextGen portal. One was to manually enter the data, which for us, there was so much data that just didn't make any sense. And then option 2 was to submit a CSV file, which would contain all the data already in the proper format. We, of course, went with the second option. However, we broke the reports or the reporting down to individual reports per site. Majority of the reason we did that was to make sure that if something were to happen when we submitted, it wouldn't affect everything. It made it into more bite-sized pieces that if something went wrong, it was easier to fix for a smaller portion and ensured that we got as much as possible in as quick as possible. Now, with the submissions and working in the CDER NextGen portal, we did see parsing errors, and we did occasionally have the program crash. Not often, but a couple times. That concludes our review of the process that we use to submit our data. Next, I'm going to go over some questions and suggestions for the FDA. So starting with some clarification requests. What would be FDA's guidance or preference on how we calculate the drug substance numbers? How do we handle the calculation where the yield for a batch does not divide out exactly? Simple example, 75 kilogram yield, 10 kilogram drum equals 7.5 drums. Do you round up? Do you round down? Should we be submitting with non-whole numbers or something else I haven't thought of? And then to carry that one step further, what if you manufacture multiple batches in a month? Do you want us to calculate each batch separately or add them up and then calculate? So carry this simple example further, 2 batches with 75 kilograms per yield. Combined, easy math, 150 kilograms divided by 10 gives you 15 drums. However, if you do it individually, in this case, you end up with 7.5 drums for each. Now, if you round up or round down for each individually and then add them up, you could have 16 drums for rounding up and 14 for rounding down. So it does matter how we calculate this stuff. So I do think some additional clarification is necessary on how you want us to handle this. Last clarification request. So for marketed product, which release should we use to identify the site that reports? Should it be released from site or released to market? This can have very drastic effects because there are some circumstances where you may have a manufacturing site that sends their product to another site for release to market, who then does the reporting. So some additional clarity would be nice around this. Next up, a couple questions. Currently, we are reporting on both the distributed NDCs and the manufacturer NDCs. In essence, we are double reporting the same information. Would it not be more value added to report on the distributed NDCs and not worry about the manufacturer NDCs? And then at some point, I expect that the FDA will introduce some type of arrears list for companies that have not submitted. Has FDA given any thought on whom they will notify with that? Is this something where we should be identifying the proper person, or are you going to use some other system? One suggestion, possibly the contact identified in the labeler code request. In theory, they're going to have that in place regardless. So even if you had a newer company that's still learning about these things and may not have submitted a report in the past, you would have somebody identified. Then a couple suggestions. There's been a lot of discussion and confusion around whether sites that only package the finished marketed product are required to report. And I do think clarification is needed on this topic, but if the decision is that they do need to report, consideration should be given to adding label as a business operation instead of just the current 6, but adding a 7th, as this would represent the site where final packaging happened and would give you a more accurate picture. And then next suggestion would be to include an example of a complex supply chain, identifying who is responsible for reporting on different NDCs that would be in place to support a product. An example of a complex supply chain is included on the next slide, and then the slide that follows that depicts the possible reporting responsibilities. So I'm not going to go through this in great detail. I just want to say that for the complex supply chain, I gave 2 API manufacturers, a bulk drug product manufacturer, a packaging company, and then a facility that both manufactures and packages the marketed product. And then here is my understanding or interpretation of how that reporting would go. I provide this more to start conversation. I'm not saying that I have the definitive answer, and I would be very interested to hear what the FDA thinks about this. So next up, I'm going to share some experiences from a smaller pharma company. First, some background for this smaller pharma company. They were a specialty pharma company with large and small molecule drug applications. They used release to market to define their reporting numbers. They reported on any NDC that is contained in an SPL that they submitted. And then in order for them to generate the information for submission, they had a number of groups involved: regulatory publisher, regulatory labeling, quality and supply chain, and regulatory CMC. So the regulatory publisher provided the initial template and submitted the final result. Reg labeling provided the list of SKUs and scope based on the DUNS/NDC. They developed the necessary calculations. They provided product-specific templates to the appropriate quality and supply chain contacts for batch release alignment. And then third group, quality and supply chain. They populated the outermost quantity released by month based on batch record review and SAP. And they calculated the innermost quantity released based on the calculations set up by regulatory labeling. And then lastly, regulatory CMC. They reviewed and verified the completed template. And now for some feedback from the smaller pharma company. So one of the problems they encountered, companies had different interpretations on who should submit for this requirement. And I think a lot of us ran into that problem. A couple suggestions for processes. Remove the need to report on innermost. And then the template was very useful, but it was easily broken. I'm not sure exactly what specifically they're speaking about there, but I do know it did have some problems with DUNS numbers that had zeros to start with. And then some suggestions for guidance. Eliminate the need to submit the distributor NDC info because the info will already be provided in the manufacturer submission and would get rid of the duplication. When I saw this information, it made me chuckle because I have the other view where get rid of the manufacturer, just report on the distributor. But two ways of getting to the same destination. And then provide some additional clarity around agents authorized by the manufacturer to submit on their behalf versus FDA official authorized agent. Lastly, manufacturer versus registrant. And they bring up a very good point with that. it was very difficult to understand who was being talked about in the guidance. You really had to dig to find where registrant was applying to the manufacturer. And so some additional clarity or simplification may be in order for that. So lastly, I want to do a little plug for the volunteer team that I am on, which was mentioned in my introduction, SPL Process Team. We are a free volunteer industry group where we discuss and provide assistance for SPL and related subjects. Anyone is welcome to attend. We are not affiliated with any organization. If you're interested in attending our monthly meetings, please reach out to our co-chairs and we will add you to our distribution list and forward along the meeting invite. And I have provided you here the email addresses for co-chairs. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Hopefully everyone's still awake out there, and I do look forward to the discussions that will follow. Have a good day.
Thank you all so much for the final presentations. We'll now transition to our final FDA Q&A panel. If you haven't had a chance to submit your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. We might even get some questions that we weren't able to quite answer earlier due to the volume. The first group of questions will be directed to Jennifer Ford, and here is the first question. Do facilities that only perform final packaging of marketed product have to report on the distributed NDCs? If they don't, who does? Seems like we may be having a little muting problem right now. What we're going to do is go on to the next panelist while our tech team jumps in and helps our first panelist out. We're going to move on to our second panelist, which is Jennifer Highland. And here is the first question for Jennifer Highland. What are some common errors found in reports that have already been submitted?
Hi, yes, thank you for that question. Many errors are coming from CSV files. One type of common error is that there are not 13 lines per NDC, and we do need to have all 13 lines, 1 line per month plus an annual total, not just the months in which an NDC was actually produced. You can fill in zeros or leave blank the months without actually commercial release. Another common problem was that files seem to have an empty line between lines of data, and the system can't process that. Some files contain lowercase letters for the package type, and they do need to appear exactly as they do in the template file. The CARES Act website has a document called CSV instructions, and this contains a lot of tips on how to correctly fill out each field. Some files also contain duplicates, and a duplicate, rows are deduplicated by DUNS, business operation, and NDC. So as long as the combination of those 3 elements is unique, then the system can process the file. Because there can be multiple DUNS, multiple business operations in a file, but they can't be repeated across those 3 elements together. Some errors are not visible when the file is open in a spreadsheet application. CSV is a universal text format, so CSV files can be opened and edited in word processing programs. When some files with errors were opened in a word processing program, there were rows of only commas at the bottom. And so these empty rows needed to be deleted in order for the system to be able to read the file. If a submitter receives an error message after they've submitted a CSV file, they can go back to their submission page and download a file to review. And actually, anyone can go back and download their CSV file, even if it was successfully submitted, if they would like to review it or keep a copy of it. Also, some reports contain the same amounts under both the innermost packaging and outermost packaging. If packaging is 1-to-1, then amounts should be reported only in the outermost packaging section. This is not an error that would cause the submission to fail, but it's just an extra type of reporting that's not necessary. So thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have about 3 or 4 more questions for Jennifer Highland, and here is the next question. Please clarify what needs to be reported by foreign API manufacturers. Do they report total amounts for drugs listed or only the portion of their production that is exported to the U.S.?
Okay, for foreign manufacturers, amounts should be reported for all of listed drugs that are offered for export to the US. When they know that amount, they should report only the amount offered for export to the US and put no in the market unknown column of the CSV file, or leave the market unknown box empty for manual entry. If they don't know the amount offered for export to the US, then they should report the total amount produced and put yes in the market unknown column of the CSV file, or check the market unknown box for manual entry. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have about 3 more questions for Jennifer Highland, and here is the next question. Can you please clarify the reporting under a manufacturer's NDC and PLD's NDC?
Okay, the CARES Act imposes the reporting requirement on registrants. So therefore, the contract manufacturer should submit this information for both NDCs. However, the contract manufacturer may authorize the application holder or PLD to submit the report or reports on their behalf. And the amounts for both NDCs should be reported under the manufacturer's DUNS. Additionally, if a manufacturer ships product to a repackager, then both the manufacturer and repackager should report amounts under their respective DUNS and NDCs. Thanks.
Thanks for responding to that question. We've got 2 more questions for Jennifer Highland, and here is the next question. Please clarify what should be submitted for U.S. manufacturers who export listed drug products. Are exported drug products excluded from reporting?
Let's see. U.S. manufacturers should report amounts for all listed drugs they release for commercial distribution, regardless of their final destination. As a reminder, the amount released for commercial distribution should be reported. This amount may or may not be the same as the amount manufactured or the amount actually distributed. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got 1 more question for Jennifer Highland, and here's the question. How should amounts be reported for drugs that have been delisted, drugs that have had their NDC changed, or establishments that have changed their DUNS?
Generally, data should be reported under NDCs and DUNS for the time period in which they were active during the reporting year. So if a product's NDC changed during a reporting year, then amounts should be reported for both of those NDCs for that reporting year. For data that is being reported monthly, the months after the NDC was delisted should have zeros. For the NDC that is created during a reporting year, the months before it was created should have zeros. And if a DUNS was changed during a reporting year, then amounts should be reported for each DUNS for the time period it was in use. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. We're going to check back in at the top of our Q&A panel with Jennifer Ford and ask the following question. Do the facilities that only perform final packaging of marketed products have to report on the distributed NDCs? If they don't, who does?
Thank you for that question. So under Section 510J3 of the Act, there's a requirement that each person, which includes repackers and relabelers that register with FDA with regard to a drug, must report annually on the amount of listed drug. So the short answer is yes, there is that requirement for repackagers. They are within that group of registrants that are required to submit a drug amount report to the agency. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another group of questions, and we'll ask the next one for Jennifer Ford. And here's the question. The guidance documents state that we are supposed to use release for calculating the manufacturing numbers. Which release? Release to market, which would only apply to the finished packaged NDCs, not bulks, or release from site. This could be applied to both finish, pack, and bulk NDCs.
The draft guidance provides that the report should be organized by the amount of drug released in each month. Footnote 14 of the draft guidance reporting amount of listed drugs and biological products under Section 510J3 of the FD&C Act provides a detailed explanation and also some references as to what release means. Getting more to the core of what I understand the question to be, the scope of drugs that are released for commercial distribution includes finished packaged drugs as well as bulk drugs. So for instance, it includes finished dosage form product, which for the purposes of our draft guidance is a drug that is in finished dosage form, for example, a finished tablet, whether or not it is in a package form suitable for distribution to pharmacies, hospitals, or other sellers of the drug that might directly provide the drug to a patient or a consumer. So it would include, for instance, a drum of bulk finished tablets. So the scope of drugs released for commercial distribution also includes API as well as other listed drugs. And if you look in our draft guidance, there are different categories of drugs that are explained with different definitions. And if there are further questions, please don't hesitate to contact our drug amount reporting mailbox, drug amount reporting at fda.hhs.gov. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have more questions for Jennifer Ford, and here is the next question. Why are we reporting for both distributor NDCs and manufacturer NDCs? Are we not double reporting?
Okay, so for human drugs that are manufactured by a registrant for commercial distribution under the trade name or label of a private label distributor, the data should take into account drug amounts with an NDC associated with the registrant's labeler code, as well as drug amounts with an NDC associated with the private label distributor's labeler code. So that's what's outlined in our draft guidance. So accordingly, data associated with human drugs should be organized and submitted separately by the NDC associated with the registrant's labeler code, and the NDC associated with the private label distributor's labeler code. And to kind of get to what I understand the core of the question to be, we arrived at this recommendation because this information facilitates the agency's reconciliation of data with respect to drugs that are manufactured by a registrant for commercial distribution under the trade name or label of a private label distributor. I'll note that we are considering comments to our draft guidance on this point regarding the recommended reporting framework for drugs distributed under a private label distributor. But the recommendation was arrived at because it was intended to facilitate our reconciliation of data. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Jennifer Ford is the following. Has there been consideration given to reporting of medically necessary OTC drugs instead of all OTC drugs?
Thank you for that question. As previously noted, Section 510J3 of the Act is not limited to application approved products. And so listed drug products, including OTC monograph products, are still subject to reporting. OTC drugs that are application approved are also subject to reporting. And with respect to OTC monograph drugs specifically, as previously noted, we historically have not had access to the distribution data that we would otherwise receive in the annual reports, for instance, for NDA and ANDA products. So this provides us with an important source of information about the drug supply chain for OTC drugs. Can ultimately help inform our operational decision-making. This is information that can help facilitate our access to information useful in making drug facility surveillance decisions. At the same time, we do understand that comments were provided to the docket on this point, and we are considering all the comments that were received to the docket. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We just got a couple more questions for Jennifer Ford, and here's the next question. As we report once a year, would it not be simpler to report by year, not by month? If the answer is no, then what value or info is derived from reporting by month, as it wouldn't show that a site had additional manufacturing capacity?
So as the question suggests, the draft guidance does recommend that the drug amount report be organized by the amount of drug manufactured for commercial distribution in each month. And also our electronic portal is set up in a way to facilitate reporting using a monthly breakdown. We do believe that having the data broken out in this way facilitates the agency's ability to review for historical trends. I believe Matthew Rosenberg touched on this earlier in his discussion. And I also want to note, as I stated on the prior responses to the prior questions, that we are considering comments to our draft guidance on this point regarding the monthly breakdown of data. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have one last question for Jennifer Ford, and here's the question. Instead of the current drug volume reporting process, would it not make more sense to expand the reporting requirements in the annual reports for a product?
Yeah, so essentially the reporting requirements and structures for these reports is a little different right? You have the annual reports for a product, which I understand the reference to be for the application products. For instance, the reports for NDAs and ANDAs submitted under Section 21 CFR 314.81. And so that reporting scheme goes to applicants, right? The reporting responsibility rests on the applicant. And for the reporting framework under CARES, now Section 510J3 of the Act, the onus lies on the registrant. And I talked a little bit before about how this results in a little bit of a different data breakdown. So for instance, with information that we receive under CARES, we will receive more establishment-specific information. And there's also, of course, the timing issue. We intend to receive the reports under CARES at about the same time frame, which will really facilitate our ability to compare the data across registrants and give us a more comprehensive picture during a specific time period. So those are just some of the differences and distinctions there. We do note that with respect to NDA and ANDA products, there are certain circumstances where the agency is not inclined to take action if the applicant does not include distribution data in their annual report. So that's the annual report associated with the applicant's responsibility to submit a report under 314.81. If a CARES Act report is submitted instead. And for more information on this, please, we encourage you to take a look at question and answer B, that's B as in boy, in our draft guidance. And if there are still questions on that, please consider writing to us at drug amount reporting at fda.hhs.gov. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. We're now moving on to our next panelist, Obina Uguoju. And here's the first question for Obina. How is the FDA using or planning to use this information overall?
Yeah, hi. Again, thanks for that question. And pretty much, I'm going to try to reemphasize what my colleague Matt Rosenberg he spoke earlier during the morning session. Essentially, he presented that FDA that we intend to use this data to basically enhance our understanding of the drug supply chain, right? And I think he also mentioned that we want to use it to prioritize our risk-based inspection. I think in his slide, he showed a situation where he had a manufacturing facility that was making a high-risk product and OTC products, right? And in terms of, without knowing how much, what the quantity of the OTC products that was produced, you probably, in modeling exposure, would think that, okay, hey, this particular facility is a high-risk facility. But if you find out that, okay, that most of the products that was manufactured is OTC products, then you might look at it differently. So these are some of the data that, the insight that we're talking about that will help FDA accomplish our mission. And then obviously the Congress gave us this act, right? And then lastly, obviously, we talked about responding to a drug supply chain and all the modern activities that we intend to do with that data, whether it's historical. And so that's kind of a brief snapshot of how FDA really intends to use this information. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have a few more questions for Obina. Here's the next question. The drug volume report used a limited list of business operations. Will there be an alignment to include the correct business operation for sites that only perform packaging of the finished product?
Yeah, thank you again for this question. I think this kind of question has occurred several times, throughout the as we were answering even questions from the industry when they were submitting data for calendar year 2020 and 2021. So I think when the draft guidance was being created, right, we thought about how to simplify the reporting for the industry. And so we, at that time, thought that pack and label operations should be grouped under the manufacturer, right, as a business operation. Because it's kind of it's defined as part of the manufacturing process. So in this instance, we're recommending that if you do pack or labeling operation, that you should choose the manufacturer as your business operation. And I think as Jennifer mentioned, we're going to be looking at all the submissions and recommendations and comments that have been submitted to us through the docket, and we'll make some evaluation on that. But it was our attempt to sort of try to simplify the options that registrants are able to pick when submitting drug amount data. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Got a couple more questions for Obanon. Here is the next question. Should the DUNS always be the registrant DUNS?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because I think I saw whether it was Ben's presentation where I think it was mentioned that people were a little bit confused with what we meant by registrant or the establishment, which is the manufacturer. So in this instance, essentially what we really want is the DUNS of where the product was manufactured. So what we really want when you're submitting your report is the establishment DUNS. So hopefully that clarifies the question. And again, please, if you have this kind of concerns or when you're trying to prepare your report, please submit or email your question to us at the drug amount reporting email address at fda.hhs.gov. I will be ready to answer your questions. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Obanon. Here is the question. For drugs for further processing, what if you only have one labeler code and not NDCs by dose?
Yeah, so this one is a kind of a question that the way I would like to clarify this is that one of our colleagues earlier mentioned about registration and listing requirements, right? And for you to have a properly listed product, right, it has to be listed by the NDC, which will comprise of the labeler code, the product code, and the packaging code. So I will assume here that it's either maybe there's some misunderstanding about what that particular listed drug for further processing, what the listing requirement is for. So anyway, if you can, the person that submitted this question, if you want, you can again send an email to us, and then we'll probably try to clarify what could be going on here. So thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. We just had a question come in through the Q&A chat pod for Daniil Grabarov. And here is the question for Daniil. Because a CSV file can't be edited once created, it's difficult to tell what the error may be, even for the assistance staff. Would there be an easier way to report the data?
Thank you for that question. So this must be referring to a situation which we heard in a couple of industry presentations today, which is essentially when opening that CSV file in Excel would truncate the leading zeros in numeric fields, which we heard was happening, and we're definitely aware of that. It could happen to DUNS. information. And what is suggested to do instead is to open that CSV file in an open source text editor, Notepad or Notepad++. And that could be done both before uploading the file, just to verify and to maybe do a couple of visual checks. And some of them Jennifer Highland did point out when she was responding to one of the previous questions. Or it could also be done after an unsuccessful upload attempt when there is a parser error. And that way you could go back and can download the file and review just to make sure that again, there are no visible errors. And I also wanted to point out, which has been mentioned before, CEDAR NextGen portal support team is always available to help out with these situations, and they can be reached at edmsupport@fda.hhs.gov. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We're heading back up to the top of our Q&A panel discussion. Got time for maybe just one or two more questions for Jennifer Ford that just came in. And here's the question. Please clarify, if a manufacturer is not the ANDA holder, can the ANDA holder report on behalf of the manufacturer? If so, how does the FDA reconcile reporting from registered manufacturers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So again, with respect to NDA and ANDA products, there are certain circumstances where the agency is not inclined to take action if the applicant does not submit the distribution data in their annual report. If a CARES Act report is submitted instead, there's question and answer B in the draft guidance on that. Also going perhaps more directly to the question, an applicant that is including a holder of an ANDA that's been authorized as an agent on behalf of a registrant to submit a report on the contract manufacturer's behalf can do so, but each registrant is ultimately responsible for ensuring that an accurate and timely report is submitted on its behalf. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Looks like we have time just to squeeze one more question in for Jennifer Ford, and here's the question. Are we meeting the annual requirement to report listed drugs if we submit an annual report with the distribution data in 1.13.11?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I have to admit, I'm not clear on the 1.13.11, but I see that it might be a reference to the annual reporting obligations under 21 CFR 314.81. And so these are separate requirements. The submission of an annual report with distribution data by the applicant under 314.81, that by itself does not satisfy registrant's obligation to submit a report under section 510J3 of the Act. So I hope that clarifies that question. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question, and that's all the time we have for questions. A huge thank you to our FDA panel for answering the numerous questions that came in during Q&A. Before we turn everything back over to Jennifer Ford for some closing remarks, we do have a few reminders. Remember, the recordings for today's presentation will be posted in 5 business days. In addition to the speaker evaluation, we also have our final evaluation. The final survey is the mechanism by which you will receive the certificate of attendance. When an attendee completes the survey evaluation, they can then download a certificate of attendance, which may be used in support of RAP, SOCRA, ACRP, and SQA credits. The certificate must be downloaded immediately after completing the survey. Otherwise, the opportunity is lost. Evaluations and certificates will only be available for 2 weeks, and that's until September the 22nd. It's now our pleasure to welcome back Jennifer Ford to provide some closing remarks before we adjourn. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hello, this is Jennifer Ford again, Regulatory Counsel at CEDAR's Office of Regulatory Policy. I would like to thank all of the presenters for their engaging presentations, and also a personal thanks to each of the audience members for attending this SBIA webinar on reporting drug amount under Section 510J3 of the FD&C Act. We would like to reiterate that the data received by FDA under the Drug Amount Reporting Program are important because they provide the agency with a more comprehensive picture of the drug supply chain. This more comprehensive picture of the drug supply chain helps to inform our operational decision-making in furtherance of our mission to protect and promote the public health. This includes our operational decision-making around inspection planning and mitigating supply chain disruptions. In carrying out this program, we greatly appreciate the submission of data for those that have already submitted data for the first couple of years of the program. We also sincerely appreciate the engagement of the public and your feedback as it helps to improve and strengthen the Drug Amount Reporting Program. I again note that we have been reviewing public comments submitted to the dockets for the associated draft regulatory guidance and technical conformance guide documents. We appreciate the comments received, and we are taking them into consideration in conjunction with further implementation of the Drug Amount Reporting Program. If you are a registrant of a listed drug and have yet to submit drug amount data for 2020 or 2021, you can really help support the program by submitting your data. Additionally, as previously noted, registrants are required under Section 510J3 of the FD&C Act to report annually regarding the amount of listed drugs that are manufactured, prepared, propagated, compounded, or processed for commercial distribution. For questions regarding the content to be submitted in a Section 510J3 report, please see the contacts listed on this slide. Technical questions regarding the submission process should be sent to edmsupport@fda.hhs.gov. Thank you all so much again for your participation in this webinar, and have a great rest of your day.